Hi, my name is Paul Vorobyev. Um, I'm going to be giving a talk about general advice for computer science students and new grads. Originally, this started out as a talk about, um, I guess, like career advice on things I've learned, in the past few years. But then I ended up having different ideas and notions of what I wanted this talk to be. So I sort of turned it into something a little more general, where most of it does pretty much apply universally. And I still do, like the latter half of this talk is just post grad advice. But the first half talks a lot about things that are applicable to pretty much any Rutgers student that has finished 111 or 112. So I'll just get into it. So about myself, I currently work at a FANG. I don't want to call out my employer specifically because I am not speaking on behalf of them, and I didn't want to deal with clearance things. And also, I just really sort of wanted to make this a little more personable. I work on low-level system software. I Before this, for a couple of years, I worked on a different team where I was working on iOS infrastructure. I gave a hacker hour about it last year. I studied computer science at Rutgers. I graduated in 2018 with a BA. I got below a 3.0, and there's a reason why I'm owning up to these things. But in college, I interned at the same thing for 2 summers before graduating. I also worked at OSS, which works on mobile apps, and as well as some system administration things for the university. And I also interned at a mobile startup after 12th grade. The other thing I would like to own up to is that I was let go of the latter of these two jobs because at the time I was dealing with a lot of things and I was not a very communicative or attentive employee. And the reason I'm getting at these things is not to sort of brag that, oh, I'm an idiot and I got away with it. It's to share a very brutally honest portrait of you can achieve some sort of success within this industry or within Rutgers, despite having issues in college, because college is genuinely mentally taxing and difficult. So I wanted to be honest about that. So what's this talk about? Sort of a sequel to Surviving CS, but shifted less towards freshmen and more towards people into college, towards the end of college, and those who have already graduated. So it's a mix of advice, success in school, on the job, and adulting. The next few slides will also be a lot about just mindset and mental health stuff. I want to avoid as much bullshit as possible. I think that there's a lot of ways to be sort of disingenuous when giving talks like this. And I really want to cultivate something that is a little more healthy. I also know that it's final season's coming up and everybody's, locked in because of COVID. I would like for it to be honest, and I would like for it especially to be non-obvious things that you can't Google, because again, there are a lot of talks and guides about things like this, but especially because all of you are computer science students, I expect that you know how to Google things. The final thing is that I want this talk to be revisitable. It has links to a bunch of things throughout, but it has different advice for different life situations and just points in your college career. So your experience will vary. Please come back. See, maybe it is bullshit. Maybe I'm wrong. But it will be interesting to know how it held up. So why am I giving another talk about this? Because there is Surviving CS at the beginning. There are several guides for Rutgers CS specifically, for how do I survive CS. a lot of them are missing things, and a lot of advice is just actively harmful. So I would bet that everybody in this talk has heard some advice for succeeding and finding, a job or some other notion of success within Rutgers CS. And usually they're of the form. Grind leak code 24/7. If you're programming in your free time, it should be leak code. Nothing else is worth it. Do a bunch of side projects without really defining what a side project is or why you would want to do one. And only FANG and unicorn jobs are worth it, which is far from the case. So yeah, these pieces of advice are parroted ad infinitum, and they're rarely helpful, and you already know them. So the problem with these pieces of advice, and really sort of like the underlying reason why I'm giving this talk, or rather the thesis of this talk, is that a lot of students are anxious. There is what I would like to call a treadmill of I have tos, and as I interviewed a few people, sort of getting their advice and experiences, I used this metaphor quite a lot, where oftentimes you will see like a bunch of kids that you perceive to be successful in the cave, and you feel that you need to sort of be this carbon copy of them. So you need to get a 4.0 and get this specific internship and go work specifically there. And at some point, as you're running on this treadmill, it is at a predefined speed, and you're not particularly going anywhere. You are making somebody else's decisions, and this metaphor now falls apart, but going somewhere that is not necessarily your choice. And I've been there, and it sucks. So that's really why I'm giving this talk. And my final sort of meta slide is that all advice is anecdotal. So any advice that anybody's going to give you is going to be a reflection of their biases and experiences and whatever. And this talk is no exception. Like, I'm going to talk about things that work for me, and things that I really regret not doing, things that I learned too late. Intuitively, like, you can't follow all advice that's given to you. Like, at some point, you are going to encounter a contradiction. So as somebody who still feels historically anxious about not following every piece of advice that I get, don't worry if none of these things apply to you. Don't worry if you disagree with them. I'm just one guy giving his dumb opinions to your face. So yeah. Also, everything here is very SWE focused. I really want Rutgers students to like go do design PM things, and for that to be promoted more in USACS and the computer science community at large. But I myself don't. So if I ever give this talk a second time, I would like to reiterate it. But please reach out to me if you're interested in these things, and I can connect you with somebody who might be able to answer your questions or point you in the right direction. Cool. So first thing that you really need to do to be successful or really get anywhere within sort of both your time as a student and your career is to just think. A lot of advice really reduces to use your brain, but specifically I want to frame this as thinking about who you are, why you're here, and what you want. And I think that answering these questions is really 99% of being successful in whatever capacity. And I'm saying this because most of the time it's very difficult to pin that down. It's a vague question. What do I want? What do I want to do in life? These are things that people have sort of midlife crises over, in their 40s. So don't worry about necessarily answering them to a T. Rather, they serve as guiding questions for things that you should work on and do in college. So don't worry about finding a correct answer. Also, don't worry about finding a final answer, because again, these are more of a guiding process rather than an end goal. And some sort of questions that help you evaluate these things are, how would I describe myself in a few sentences? Or why am I studying CS? What do I want to learn in college, and how do I start learning it? So I could not answer most of these questions, truth be told. When I was in college, I felt very frustrated that I felt just sort of like a blank person, where I don't know, I didn't feel that I had, I mean, many hobbies in general. Like, I didn't feel that I was even particularly good at programming. So I have sort of used these things to sort of frame my next steps, whether it is, you know, choosing things that I want to learn specifically and pursuing them, or it is sort of developing myself so that I can meet somebody and say, "Hey, I'm Paul," and describe myself confidently. So while I'm on the topic of thinking, I also want to convince the viewer, listener of this talk that you are also smart and you are capable of doing hard things. So I think that there's a lot of sort of, I guess, again, anxiety about intelligence, especially within the Rutgers CS community. And again, you see sort of these upperclassmen in the cave, and they tend to have all these internships, and they did a double or triple major, and it it tends to sort of demotivate you, because I mean, at least for myself, I came in with prior programming experience, and I still just was constantly feeling down, and I didn't really challenge myself as a result. And the fact of the matter is that you can do hard things. Like, if you care enough, first of all, to listen to this talk, to be here, you are smart enough to do whatever the hell you want in this field. Um, Change your definition of smart to just somebody who spends a lot of time, or has spent enough time doing something and has accumulated experience. Because at the end of the day, like, the notion of intelligence in a raw clinical scientific way is still poorly defined. Psychometrics are kind of a scam. So there's no really important definition of smart for all intents and purposes. As long as you are working hard and trying new things, enjoying yourself, you're smart. You're getting there. Do not worry, and don't use this as sort of as a reason to doubt yourself, or to prevent yourself from doing certain things, from applying to things. Um, the flip side of this is that you're still a student, even if you've graduated, even if you've taught yourself programming growing up, even if you're a senior with a FANG job, you're still a student. And you need to understand that you don't know really anything about programming, and you are not expected to. And it's very easy to say this, but it's difficult to internalize it and put it into practice. I think that everybody sort of has, these modest humble brag moments, like, oh, I totally failed that test, and you end up doing really well. But it's very freeing and not inherently a bad thing to not know a lot about programming. Like, that's why you're in school. That literally the point. And I feel that a lot of students that I interact with, especially as I've come back for recruiting trips after I've graduated, really want to assert themselves as sort of expert programmers. And they tend to name drop programming languages that they barely use. They tend to have opinions. I think that a lot of people just have opinions about programming languages in particular that are very weird, just because programming languages are complex things that, it's not just a syntax. There's a lot of semantics inherent with these programming languages. So, like, people will say, like, oh, JavaScript sucks, or PHP sucks, where, to some extent, yeah, you're probably right. But also, if I ask them why they think that, they usually are not able to answer that. And the fact of the matter is that, like, as somebody who has done the same thing, coming from myself, I honestly just did it because I wanted to feel cool. But the fact of the matter with that is that if you're studying computer science, you can't be cool. That is really an inherent quality of programmers, that you're not cool. So don't try to have don't hold opinions just because they're popular. And that doesn't mean that your opinions are invalid, or that you shouldn't hold opinions, but aggressively question why you hold them. And if you can't articulate why, then it doesn't, you shouldn't be holding them. Really, the best way to put this feeling of not knowing anything into practice is just maintaining your interest, maintaining a growth mindset, and discovering your known unknowns. So your known unknowns are just things that you know that you don't know that you may potentially pursue down the line. So quick tip on finding your known unknowns in college, after college, whenever. General advice: read articles, lectures, and talks, take difficult classes, write toy programs or side projects. One exercise I particularly enjoy doing is asking myself questions about certain processes or just high-level ideas, and seeing how deeply I can answer them. So, for example, what happens when you type ls into a terminal and hit enter? This is a common interview question, actually, and you can answer it from anywhere from 5 seconds. I type ls and hit enter, and it lists files, to spending an hour to answering, how does a button on a mesh keyboard complete a circuit, sending an interrupt to your CPU, and then your kernel handling that interrupt, and sending it all up to the shell into user space? And then how does the shell find the ls executable? And then how does it switch to the ls executable so that it's running instead of shell? A lot of the time, I find that if I find some sort of gap in my explanation, then I've immediately found a known unknown. And it also, if I have trouble going the distance, so if I go as deep as I can and I have no gaps, but I can only do it for like a minute or two, then that also usually means that I, have failed to go sufficiently deep at something. So revisiting this, or coming up with sort of questions that allow you to go through some complex process across many sort of layers of abstraction, can be a really fun and interesting way to test your knowledge and find the things that you can learn and work on, and develop yourself towards. So while you're in school, especially, community and relationships are really, really important. So they will really be the bedrock of everything that you do. I spent a lot of time in the cave when I was in college. I like, at the least, it's a great support network and social circle. Of course, I recommend, also joining clubs and finding meaning outside of computer science. But especially just because the field can be sort of intense. You're going to be spending a lot of time with your classmates, but they also can give you a lot of advice and mentorship and inspiration. So try as much as possible to sort of get involved. I have links to a bunch of clubs. I will post these slides after the talk. There are also several talks that sort of get created and die and then get created a few years later at Rutgers. So I will also update these slides with their current status. The other, aside from having community and relationships, the other thing that I really want to stress is technical discussion friends or mentorship. So the reason why I'm sort of separating these two, or articulating this in a very weird way. So a technical discussion friend is someone whose opinions you respect, with whom you can talk about programming. I have a weird typo. It's a weird bug, so I guess it's meta, but yeah, somebody whose opinions you respect. So that usually takes the form of a mentor, but I'm going to get to that in a second. It's a good sort of way to keep yourself involved in thinking about computer science and programming. So I've never really had a sort of formal USACS program mentor, but I have plenty of friends with whom I can discuss programming, and we have a relationship outside of that. But I can also, send them a weird bug, send them an article that I read, and share my opinions, and generally feel secure in expressing them. And I think that that's very necessary. It's not even necessarily somebody who knows more than you. Also, it can just be a classmate or somebody that you know. And also, I did mention earlier that holding dumb opinions, it can be sort of toxic and detrimental to your mindset. But I also think that holding dumb opinions is very integral to programming culture. And sometimes I'll just message one of my friends like, hey, if you write your code in this way, then I fucking hate you and you're wrong. And I don't know, it's a pointless but fun endeavor. Regardless, having somebody to interface with while you're growing as a developer is crucial. The thing about mentorship, though, is that usually you don't want a mentor. Usually you do want a technical friend, because a lot of people, when they use the phrase "I'm looking for a mentor," and I've seen this again, not only from students but postgrads as well, like new grad software engineers, is that they really want a teacher or tutor or somebody to spoon feed them. And it's not even that being spoon fed is bad, or that they or that it's not helpful, but rather, if you're not aware of that, or if you are sort of blocking yourself from learning about something or pursuing something just because there's sort of this dissonance of what you want and what you really want, then you're going to end up getting nowhere. I felt this way with, personally, I felt this way with compilers and programming languages for many years. I was always interested in those two topics in college, and I didn't really get a good grounding on them. So after college, I asked a coworker to quote unquote mentor me. And I really just sort of expected her to just read things with me and explain things to me. And it ended up being a very unproductive relationship, because what ended up happening is that, when you have somebody that doesn't do as much of the work or doesn't hold up their side of the conversation in one of these dynamics, then it just becomes frustrating. Ultimately, I ended up pursuing those things myself, and apologizing to her. And now we actually have technical discussions about those things. So although mentor is going to be a commonly used word, I know that USACS runs a mentorship program. Most of the time, I would advise you to sort of drive the relationship yourself, and frame it as a technical friendship rather than a mentorship relationship. And of course, you will find people who are more than happy to explain things to you, and wanting things explained to you is not a bad thing, but just be careful what you're asking for. And just some guidelines about getting yourself unstuck, and sort of before you ask for a mentor, be as specific as possible. What would you like to learn about? Everything is not a good answer. Even something very broad is not a good answer. Like, get as far as possible in learning something before you actually ask for a mentor in that given field. And a good sort of exercise where, if you really just don't know, try framing it this way. If you had to choose a concrete topic for your first session, for your first lesson, what would it be? Make sure that it's aligned. And now that you have that topic, have you tried learning it yourself? And if not, go try. And if you have and you got stuck, try to figure out why. Try to get unstuck. Try to figure out if those things, if the thing that you chose for your first session is actually integral or important. A lot of the time, you'll just end up making progress by yourself. So you can be a lot more productive in driving your own growth as a programmer and software engineer, by just sort of asking these questions rather than waiting for somebody to tell you them. On the topic of questions, the thing about anything sort of in the area of STEM, but especially in computer science and math and programming, is that you're going to be confused all the time, and you need to get used to this feeling. Usually it is a good feeling. It's the feeling that you've stumbled upon something that's fundamentally a paradigm shift, and your brain is just not used to thinking in those sorts of ways.
This sorry.
Weird. Oh,
Yes, sorry about that.
no worries. Yeah, so usually being confused means that you are encountering some sort of fundamental paradigm shift in what you're learning. So if you're confused, use techniques that I mentioned previously to frame it, and make sure that you can articulate what you're confused about. It doesn't work, or I don't know what to do, are not articulate enough. You need to be specific. You need to know what exactly you're looking for. And especially, I mean, the sort of base unit of research in this major is just Googling it. And, of course, it doesn't work, is not Googleable. So learn different strategies. The basic one is just copy pasting your error into Google. So it's usually going to be a little more abstract or a little less Googleable than that. But also knowing what kind of issues you can go to Google, to Stack Overflow, rather than to actual people, to your professors, to people you consider friends and mentors. They tend to be different things because, again, like a concrete error is usually Googleable, as opposed to things that are fundamentally questions or things that you're if you're wondering how two complicated pieces of software may interact, then usually that's good. That's better for a human being. The thing is that don't be afraid to ask questions. A lot of folks in the cave, a lot of iLabs will tend to yell at you if you don't Google things first. And I think that really instills this fear of ever asking questions, and that you have to figure everything out for yourself. And you should figure things out for yourself. You should take that time. But at some point it has diminishing returns, and progressing on some endeavor is more important than sitting there and twiddling your thumbs. So please learn these two skills. It's never too late to learn them, but they will make or break your success at some point. I know that I've spoken a lot earlier about sort of being calm and doing things healthy, and I don't know, just not going by anybody else's speed. But the only sort of temporally oriented thing that I am going to advise is find a programming or research position as early in your college career as possible. Your skills will grow tremendously after just one internship. It's just things that don't really make sense in the abstract, and a lot of software engineering and programming is things that just various complex interactions that you may have between hundreds of different pieces of software that you can't really just read about and understand. So experience really does mean experience in this field, but the other thing is just skills such as version control. I know that there is a talk about version control every semester from USACS, but I don't know about all of you, but for myself, I did know how to use Git before my first internship. I didn't really know how to use it properly or well, because there is a difference between working in a Git repo with just yourself or just a few friends, as opposed to working in a repo that has been around for years, that is too big to just delete and reclone. If you mess up the checkout, that has hundreds of people possibly just constantly committing to it. So there are a lot of skills that you just uniquely need internship experience for. And the good thing is that pretty much the first one is difficult to get, but afterwards you will essentially have your pick of interviews after your first role, because I don't have proof of this, but I have on good authority that everywhere I've seen will give you an internship interview, at least, or a job interview, if you have just some paid programming experience on your resume. This is not a universal law. There are exceptions, but it is generally the case. Also, it pays better. You can pay some of your tuition. You can save some money. And the other thing is that it also helps you find what you want and what you don't want. The thing is that it's really important to figure out like what you don't want to work on, where you don't want to work, both industry and location wise. So it might suck to have a bad experience, but it will help you straighten yourself out in the end. The final thing on research, I don't have research experience. I did have a friend talk to me about it. As I understand it, it's pretty straightforward to go get a research position if you're an undergrad. If you're genuinely interested in that sort of stuff, then just interact with your professors. Don't be afraid to ask them about their research, or ask about participating. And in interviewing one of my friends, he gave me a good quote, is that your professors will use you because they have to. So like these labs are criminally understaffed. So if you want to get a research position and sort of more explore along the axis of academia, then by all means do so. So as to where you should apply, the last temporal thing is that apply early. Most of the time, like applications can open as early as August, but you will have an easier time in October rather than April. However, the flip side of this is that a lot of people will give up by December. Keep applying. You can get a solid internship in May. I know people who have gotten a solid Fortune 500 development internship, getting paid $30 an hour in New York City, that they got in May. This shit can take a while. It's not easy, and it tends to be the case that when it rains, it pours. Like you might just get nothing until the spring. I understand it's demotivating, but please keep it up. The other thing that I want to bring up is sort of attitudes around applications, and they're sort of the most troubling things that I notice when I'm talking to students that are applying for internships. And it's I'm not good enough to apply for something, or I'm too good enough to apply for something. They're both bullshit excuses. For the former, most applications have very little cost. You are spending 1 to 5 minutes, if that, just like uploading your resume, and pretty much every job application site sucks at parsing your resume, so you'll have to enter it a second time, and then you hit apply, and then you're done. So it's a very low downside thing. It's a very high upside thing. You get money, you get work experience, all those other benefits that I mentioned earlier. So ultimately, the expected value is very high for this. So by all means, if you're thinking about not applying for something, usually that's a good reason to apply for it. There are also there's no blacklists. Don't be afraid of failing interviews. Like scheduling in too many interviews is a genuine concern. So don't take on too much that you can't handle. But if you're just as afraid of interviewing somewhere because you're nervous that they won't give you an interview again, then do not worry about that. The other side of the same coin is a lot of people will not apply for certain things just because they think that they're too good for it. Like most people will just apply to like FANG unicorns and like financial firms, and that's it. There are so many places to work as a computer programmer, and a lot of those places are doing better or more interesting work than a lot of these places, than a lot of the FANG type companies that I mean. So yeah, don't worry about it. Also, don't let finances restrict you. Don't hold yourself back in any way. Get your resume reviewed, make use of your network, and once you have more experience, do try to narrow down where you applied, just because I do think that knowing what you don't want to do and sort of guiding, again, guiding to this framework of describing who you are, what you like, what you want to do is really important. Fang and unicorns are not the only jobs in this industry. As I've said, a lot of the time there is a lot of just soul-sucking monotonous work that's not worth doing. So don't try to chase prestige. Look for jobs that look interesting to you. There are a lot of startups and established companies doing fascinating work. They usually, I will just Google random companies' careers, and they will have programming positions. Last apply, no, 2 more slides about applications. So if you're early, if you're not narrowing it down, then increase your volume and just machine gun your resume at companies. For cover letters, just have a general one. And if you have some dream internship that requires one, then and only then customize it. But otherwise, it is purely a numbers game. And you can find one in unexpected places. And this is a super censored tweet just because I didn't want anybody stalking me on Twitter or the company that I interned at. But I broke a company's website in high school, and they tweeted me asking me why I broke it, because I had the way in which I broke it involved my email, which has my full name. So I replied like, hey, just messing with y'all, but I want an internship, and it worked out. Of course, I don't go around breaking companies' websites, but you can find internships at unexpected times in unexpected places, and I advise you to explore in that regard. Where to apply? OSS, Open System Solutions, is one of the best programming jobs you can have on campus. They do hire freshmen. They work on the mobile apps as well as certain system administration things, and you can also work there as a UI UX designer. Your manager would be Jack, who is also one of the kindest human beings on the face of the planet. So I highly, highly recommend applying to their applications are open right now, I believe. LCSR is the computer science department. I believe that they also work on things like grading programs for the intro classes. I don't have a link right now, but when I put these slides up, I will. I just need to somebody to get back to me. Grader and TA positions, you know, it's not a programming job, but it is nice to have on your resume. I also just have links of various compendiums of places to apply. Again, these are not the only places. If you just Google, you know, list of internship applications, you will find more. I also want to specifically call out Summer of Code. If it really is May or June and you still haven't found anything, actually, you might have to apply a little sooner than that. But I would apply to Summer of Code. You actually do get paired up with a mentor, a capital M mentor, and not a technical friend, like I was talking about earlier, that works on some open source project, and they will scope out a project for you and help you implement some feature on a popular open source project. It's great. I think they also give you a stipend. It is just as good, if not better, as an internship. So please, by all means, apply. Interviewing. Look up interview questions for the company on Glassdoor. It's very simple. A lot of people will just break their NDA, and you should use that to your advantage. If you can't get any intel, then ask your recruiter, because it's really their job to let you know. And if they're being secretive about it, then that's usually a red flag. But you should have some ideas about what you're going to be asked. Anything on your resume is fair game. So either don't bullshit, or bullshit and be able to back up your bullshit. Be able to bullshit your bullshit. Be able to talk about your experience, difficulties you faced. Try preparing some stories beforehand. If you have a tech friend or a mentor that can help you give mock interviews, this is a really good time to sort of leverage friendships and networks that you've established during your time here. Mock interviews are really useful, and they will dramatically increase your success rate here. So interviewing, if it is actually data structures and algorithms, which are quite a few of the interviews in the industry, do Leak Code and Cracking the Coding interview. If you don't know what those are, Leak Code is a site where you just has a bunch of interview problems that are data structures and algorithms. Some of them are even marked with the company that tends to ask those questions. Cracking the Coding interview is a popular book, much in the same vein, really just giving the same advice that I'm giving to you right now, and it has a lot of practice problems as well. Those interviews are not necessarily finding the correct solution. That's really what I actually wanted to touch on. Communication debugging and writing clean executable code are just as important, and sometimes more important if the question is exceedingly difficult. It's possible to pass the interview and not get a working solution. It's not common, but it is possible, simply because it's not a binary test of did the candidate solve the problem or not. It's really evaluating them as a potential coworker, as in the case of internship interviews, as somebody who is established and can grow more. So it's more important to take your time than to make sure that you solve two questions within the allotted 45 minutes. So go slowly, don't jump into coding, write out test cases, go through an algorithm, write things down in words before you jump into code. By the time you're coding, you should have a concrete idea of what you're going to be coding. I did include an example. It's not actually code. It's just sort of the first part of this, which is me going through my thought process of, before I code, what do I do when I'm asked a question? So the question being, find the first unique character in a string. These doc strings are meta comments. So the first thing I do is write out simple test cases, and I may ask questions as I go along. So are the characters ASCII values? And I also start with very simple, dumb base cases. Namely because I don't know about all of you, but I get really bad performance anxiety when I am in an interview. So I just need to put something down on the paper to, get my brain juices flowing. Afterwards, I slowly increase the complexity of the test cases that I am listing, and then eventually I am able to get a very good idea of what I need for my given solution. So you got hired, you graduated, or you're not graduated, but you're interning, you're on the job. So the first thing you need to understand is that you're still a student. You're not free. The fact of the matter is that you are a student as long as you are in this field. Hardware, software, and techniques are always changing. A lot of people believe that this is only the case for, JavaScript frameworks that get switched out every few years, but that's not true at all. Even at a very low level, things are constantly changing. The Linux kernel is behind by hardware advancements by several years and is still undergoing significant changes in its code bases. You really want to find a way to incorporate learning into your life, or not into your life, but at least your work rather. So aligning career progression with learning is not necessarily easy, because at the end of the day, you're hired to solve some sort of business need. So my only advice for that is to search for those opportunities that allow for learning. So don't be afraid to join a team if you have that freedom that involves something a little more technical or a little more infrastructure-y, if you do want to go in that route, or if you do want to go into more of a product oriented direction, then try finding a product team that is in a domain that you don't know much about, or on a platform that you don't know much about. Because at the end of the day, a good way to frame it is that your first job, your first internship, is really a scholarship to learn things. You don't know that much, and you will be constantly learning, so do not be afraid. Also to that end, find jobs and teams where everybody is smarter than you. Should go without saying, but it's better to be a small fish in a big pond than the other way around. Also, just reiterating the questions thing, do not be afraid to ask your coworkers questions, because I know for a fact, I'm not even going to qualify this with a probably, that they did not write shit down. Your documentation is terrible, period. That's fine, but it's not fine, but there is a lot of tribal knowledge, and you're going to bumping into things and unsure of why you're getting certain bugs or unsure of what's going on. Don't jump into just putting out pull requests immediately. Take some time, meet people on your team, ask them what they do, ask for some beginner tickets, and take things slowly. At the same time, don't get too complacent. If you do stay on the same team doing the same exact thing for too long without really learning anything new, you will either get really bored and frustrated. I understand that there's a life portion to a work life, but you are spending at least 40 hours a week at this job, so you don't want to be bored and frustrated at it. Just find something that engages you. But the other thing is that you might just fall behind. Some technologies do change so quickly that your team is pivoting or doing something completely different that you didn't expect, and you do not keep up. It doesn't mean that you are going to be in a constant rush or grind, but just try to be aware of learning new things. I want to also provide an example of how I have facilitated this. So I try to read articles. I have read a couple of technical books with some coworkers, but I mostly read articles. It's a great way to passively or actively absorb tech knowledge after you graduate, because you're no longer taking courses. Find some articles. I listed a few sites. Lobsters and Hacker News tend to be the standard place to go to find programming related things. There are a bunch of subreddits. I don't think that the r/programming is that good, but a lot of the programming language specific or technology specific subreddits tend to have good discussion and articles. Make sure that you read them and you're not just browsing mindlessly, because I did have this habit of doing that, and there's no point in wasting your time and lying to yourself. Either waste your time or don't pretend to be productive. Google what you don't understand and take notes. This isn't necessary because I want the barrier to absorbing technology to be as low as possible. So sometimes I'm just skimming or reading things, but do have or take opportunities to do that. I included some blogs that I really like. But you can find new ones on, again, on Lobsters, Hacker News, Reddit, wherever. Add them to an RSS feed, or just revisit them every once in a while. Dan Liu works at Twitter, and he has just interesting stories and sometimes rants about what he's worked on. My friend Stepan also runs a blog where he blogs about everything from mathematical logic to how memory works at a circuit level. He is blogging almost every week. He is constantly at the front page of Hacker News. I cannot recommend his blog enough. Corporate engineering blogs are also great. Not all of them are created equally. Some of them are more corporate than engineering. They have to go through a lot of revision from non-technical folks because there's some sort of legal concern or something. But ultimately what happens is that engineers are less likely to update that blog or post to it, or that the content of the blog is going to be very poor and heavily redacted by people who don't know what they're talking about. Some of the blogs that I have read excellent articles, and these links are actually specific articles that I like from each of these blogs, are Heap, Cloudflare, and Stripe. They regularly, I don't think that Stripe has been updated in a while, but the other two, post regularly, or at least several times a year, which is quite often for these. And they have also real world problems, which are also useful for students as well if you want an idea. They also help you find new places to work at. So highly recommend those. And if you do want a more organized system for managing these things and you want to take it a little more seriously, then I use Pocket to queue up articles, and I use an extension called Digo. I can't move my mouse, otherwise this overlay comes up, but I use an extension called Digo to highlight and annotate web pages and PDFs. I don't always do it, but I have this really horribly arranged slide with my Pocket queue over here, and just me annotating something or something that I annotated earlier this year. So it is useful. I find that annotation really helps me learn things and internalize them faster. And also I will end up remembering them for longer. Working with large code bases. So this is probably your first time working with a lot of code. Since in college, usually you're working on your own projects. You are most likely, like even your assignments are not going to be that big, so you can get away with print statement debugging, and that's something I'm going to talk about later. But I think that there's something intimidating about working with large code bases, and you tend to freeze up, much in the same way that you freeze up when you want to learn something or you have a question that's not as articulate or specific as you may think. So they aren't that scary. Usually you will be exposed to them by just doing various tasks that are given to you by whoever is helping you ramp up. My advice, however, is to map out the major organizational units of code. So what is each directory for? Why are classes done in a specific way? Or just at least a map. Sometimes why is not important. Sometimes why is just because it's arbitrary, it happened that way. But what everything is and what it's responsible for, and make sure that you are taking notes. Taking notes is really important. You have some sort of permanent record, or not permanent, but serialized record of the whole architecture organization of what you're working on, simply because you might be wrong, and you probably will be wrong about certain assumptions that you make. So if somebody corrects you, or if you want to update it, then you don't have to reconstruct it in your head again, because otherwise you are going to get lost somewhere along the way. My last tip is to use an IDE. I think that it's very cool in programming to use Vim or at least VS Code, and they're very lightweight. And I understand that IDEs can be clunky, but they tend to have excellent code indexing capabilities. So you spend most of your time reading code as a programmer. I forgot to mention that that is very much the case. You are not going to be constantly, just vomiting out, hundreds of lines of code. You're going to spend most of your career reading code. So to that end, have a good way to read code. So IDEs, I mentioned proprietary IDEs specifically just because I know that JetBrains IDEs are very popular. And I know that their code indexing is very good. They can index your code base quickly, even if it's very large. And they have things like click to go to the definition, and you can go to the file and figure out where things are defined and how things worked. The other thing is that if you insist on using a text editor, there's something called the language server protocol. It was invented by Microsoft, I believe, a few years ago, and it essentially is an open standard for enabling these sorts of code indexing capabilities. Usually setting it up is a little finicky and janky, which is why I'm saying to just use an IDE, it'll just work. However, look into LSP plugins for your desired text editor, and Godspeed for setting it up, but it is what I ended up doing. But ultimately, I would say for most people, it's just not worth wasting your time on, at least at first. The other thing with large code bases is that there is an immense feedback loop. Again, like your projects are small in college. You are usually, you hit compile, it compiles in like a few seconds. It doesn't take that long to run. You can spam print statements everywhere, and it works. It's fine. But now you don't get that as much. Now it can take minutes or hours to find out if your changes worked. So to that end, I'm going to warn you that this is important because it gets really tedious really quickly. It can just zap an 8-hour workday. I am dealing with this myself at work right now, actually. I am working on setting up some tests for components that my team works on. The problem with that is that these tests are very intricate and that these tests take like 15 minutes to run. So I end up having I run test for 15 minutes, go work on something else or do something else for those 15 minutes. And then I, have to go switch focus back to figuring out why these tests don't work. And then, editing them, reiterating on them, and then rerunning them again. And what ends up happening is that I don't quite get the chance to focus on anything in particular because I'm distracted and pulled back to this issue in 15-minute chunks, and I tend to make dumber mistakes because it gets tedious, so it starts to wear on me. Manage your feedback loop and tighten it as fast as possible. So unit test your code, write your code to be unit testable. If you cannot test different aspects and attributes of whatever abstractions you are creating, then your abstractions are bad and you need to rewrite them. Unit testing code is some of the fastest feedback that you can get. They will run a lot faster, and usually integration tests, will run while your pull request is being merged. But as having successful unit tests is the best indicator that you are making changes that are not breaking anything. If possible, also try things out in a REPL or a notebook. This works for interpreted languages, of course, like Python and JavaScript. Sometimes I just don't know if what sort of behavior to expect with Python, because sometimes it has sort of weird semantics. So I can just open a Python REPL and try it out. That's really useful. It ends up making it so that you don't have to execute your program to see if you're doing something weird. There are also some languages that let you sort of connect to REPLs or connect a REPL to existing instances of your program. Clojure, which is a programming language on the JVM, does this. So I can, have a web server or something running that's written in Clojure, and I can spin up a Clojure REPL and connect to it and break it in production, which is really cool, but it's also just genuinely useful for getting some observability. Write scaffolding code. Write bad code that makes things run a little quicker or stubs things out if you really need to. One of the things that made my 15-minute testing loop a little bit better is that I needed to fetch files and generate some files that took quite a while. So I just saved them and checked them in, and I read them during the tests. Once I actually finish writing my code, I'm going to delete all that scaffolding code. And of course, note that it may not represent a fully accurate environment, depending on how much scaffolding code you write. But it is, it can save you a lot of time. Finally, use a debugger. You should probably have learned to use one during college. I got away with print statement debugging through Compark and systems and OS, I think. But you should probably figure it out by the time you graduate college. It is extremely useful. You have observability into your compiled programs, and you can reason about the state of your program in a way that you are not able to as easily with print statements. This is a very specific piece of advice. Learn how your code is automatically tested. This is called continuous integration. So when you create a pull request, when you make some changes, usually there's some behind the scenes infrastructure that will test your code. and in different ways. And then also once you merge that pull request, your code is going to get packaged and released in some way. And you should learn how those things work, at least at a high level. I seem to be the only one complaining about this, so I'm led to believe that it might just be something at my company, but I know quite a few people, myself included, who have gotten into weird situations where there were bugs that only happened in CI or CD. And what ends up happening is that a lot of engineers will not really want or know what these bugs are because nobody wants to deal with this stuff. And if you learn even at a high level about where these things are and how these things work, you will be a hero and a magician to them. And it, again, will just save you a lot of time because there are just inherent differences between dev and test and prod. Sample questions to ask, just to guide this again. When are my tests being run? Is it after I put up my pull request, or is it after it gets approved and reviewed? Is it as it's being merged, before or after? They probably shouldn't run after. That sounds really counterintuitive. And which tests are being run at which point? At my company, we run certain sets of tests when the pull request is put up, and a fuller set of tests once the pull request is actually being merged. How is it being compiled and packaged? It is guaranteed to be compiled and packaged in a different way than what it is in your dev environment. At the very least, it is being compiled with different flags. If you work at a large company and you have you work on something like mobile apps, there's a very long and complicated process about how your mobile apps are actually distributed. And the other thing is, to whom is the package being distributed? This isn't really a programming or a CI/CD specific thing. You should really know who the audience of your software is, but knowing how long it will take and who's going to be getting it first. Some users will upgrade faster. Sysadmins, if you're writing infrastructure code then that is being released to sysadmins, then they will be more likely to upgrade to the newest version of your software than a typical iPhone or Android user will. It turns out that most mobile users actually take months to update their apps. So it can take a while to release your code. On to the more people side of things working, make sure you have face time with your manager. This is incredibly important. They are really your lifeline at the company. They sort of are connecting you to corporate. So have regular one-on-ones, preferably weekly. Try to push for this if they're not offering this already. Even regular meetings, maybe not weekly, but with your manager's manager, your skip manager, are also incredibly valuable. Your manager should know what you're working on and how important it is. Take that time to brag about it. If you don't want to waste time in your one-on-ones, because it is valuable time and you can use it however you want, then you can also just try to send them a weekly digest. I just have like a little Slack type thing with my manager, and that's where I post. They are usually the ones batting for you when it's time for promotions. And although you will probably also be writing a self-review, that should not be the first time they're hearing about what you're doing. So as long as they're informed of that, also ask for feedback, especially if you are interning somewhere, more so if you're interning somewhere, because you need feedback as fast as possible so that you can ensure a return offer. But again, we have regular performance review cycles, so you want to know how you're doing, what you could be doing better. Getting feedback is not a bad thing. You do want to be aggressive and direct about it, because the fact of the matter is that most people are shy about giving it, even managers, and it sucks, but you really need to get it out of them. Ask regularly, be persistent, be annoying, ask your coworkers this as well. By the time you get your performance assessment, it should not be a surprise. You should know what your manager felt your performance was like by that point. If it is, you need to have a serious discussion with your manager, or switch teams, or complain to your skip manager, because that's not acceptable. Onto a more oriented sort of things. So it's no secret that software engineers make too much money. As a new grad software engineer, you are going to make more, most likely more than the median household income out of college. That's not normal. Like, don't think that it is just because it happens to other Rutgers kids. Rutgers is, believe it or not, an excellent school, and it is not the average. Your situation can change, and this industry is still very new, and we live in a time of turmoil, so take advantage of it while you can. Try to identify what your financial goals are, buying a house or an apartment, or having kids, or retiring early. Not having financial goals is fine. I don't really have any concrete financial goals that I can think of, but you should still be saving as much money as possible. Live within your means. Your rent should be less than 30% of your monthly income. You really don't need a huge apartment for your first apartment out of college. Try to live with roommates. Even use your company 401k. Also, it's literally free money. It is money that you put in pre-tax out of your paycheck, and then your company, it essentially says, hey, you're saving for retirement, so I'm going to help you. Even try to maximize it if you can. It really depends on what your salary is and what your expenses are. But the maximum contribution that you can take out of your paycheck per year is $19,500. If you can hit that and you max it out every year from year one on for the duration of your career, you will retire extremely comfortably and you will have no worries. It is great to do that. And I believe that even if your income is in the low, like, six figures, even if you can match or make that 19,500 without struggling. Also, my other just immediate piece of advice is just have an emergency fund of 3 to 6 months in a savings account somewhere. Make sure that it's liquid and easily accessible, just so that you know that if something were to happen, if you lose your job, if you have some sort of emergency, you have an out. There are a lot of other pieces of advice that I can give on this, but it would take up the length of another talk, essentially. So I'm going to link to two things. I linked to Personal Finance. It's a great subreddit. I think this link is specifically to their wiki. Their wiki is very extensive and has a lot of information on what to do if you have varying circumstances, where you should be allocating your money. If you already allocated your 401k, then where else should you save your money? Bogleheads is a popular investment forum, and they have a very famous strategy for allocating your funds in a brokerage, and how to allocate them in such a way that's safe yet also effective and will reap benefits and accumulate quickly. So please check those out. The other thing, the flip side of this, is also use your money. I think that I know quite a few people that make excellent software engineer money, but are overly almost stingy and parsimonious with it. And ultimately, it's none of my business how people use your money. But I think that it's important to use it in a way that benefits you. First of all, personally for me, this entire slide is very subjective, but I think that anything that helps me professionally, price is no object. I will spend whatever it takes to level up in some skill. If that means buying some book or textbook that I'm going to read, or attending a conference, though usually your employer should reimburse that. Anything that I feel is going to help me be more effective in doing my job, I will invest in, especially in the time of work from home. Some employers are giving employees a work from home stipend, and that's great. But if you feel that life would be better with a nicer chair or a stand-up desk, then please just drop that money, because you're spending 8 hours a day at the minimum in that chair, at that desk, using that computer. So don't be afraid to put that money in. Otherwise, please spend money on things that are important to you. I'm framing it as a subjective thing. Like, honestly, I recommend travel, education, health, and donations to all of you, but I don't want to put words into your mouth. Traveling while you're young, supporting, you're still able-bodied. Usually your employee will have, a pretty good, at least 3 weeks of paid time off. So education, tutors, books, and lectures. Personally, as I've mentioned before, I was an idiot in college and there were a lot of things that I sort of missed out on. So I have been taking the opportunity to hire tutors and working with them through textbooks for certain math classes that I did not gain an intuitive understanding of. Health is also important. I have a slide about it later, but your body is really, really important, and college can wreck you with all-nighters. So please pay attention to it, and please don't spare any expense. And I also try to donate to important causes, just because that's personally, I feel that earning a lot of money from a job in the tech industry and diverting that money to funds is the most effective way that I can be altruistic or help the world. I can't really cure cancer because I skipped all my classes, but I can donate it to doctors who can cure cancer. So that's just as good. Health. Yeah, so you're probably getting decent health insurance for the first time. As soon as you graduate, like, find an apartment, you're settled in, go find a GP, a dentist, and specialists as quickly as possible. Set up appointments, get work that you need done, especially just because I don't know about you, but with regards to therapy, college is really mentally taxing. It's not a good time. I often joke that I don't know how anybody really pretends that college is normal, because nobody's getting enough sleep and everybody has really toxic habits and everybody just pretends that it's normal. So the first thing that I did out of college that I found, I shopped around therapists and found one. I have been with her for a little over a year, and has done me a lot of good. It doesn't work for everybody, but it doesn't hurt to try, and it's more likely than not that it will work for you. Exercise is the last thing. Working out, I had no time, or I had no desire, or I kept putting off while I was in college, and your schedule is a little too hectic. It's hard to keep up, but you have time now. So it doesn't have to be intense. It's okay if you have physical limitations, but go on walks, run. I was like the girl in Cookie Monster pajama pants in high school who would walk while everybody was running the mile. And now I run 3 times a week, and I've done 2 half marathons. So it's a fun way to get out of the house, especially while we're all shut in. It's a great way to meet people and cultivate a new hobby. And it's just really good self-care. It's really nice to set new goals and to exceed them, and just watch yourself progress in this thing that's sort of separate from everything else that you're doing. So highly recommend exercise. The last thing is to please come back. Rutgers is where you came from, and I think that it is really cool to shit on Rutgers, and I do it all the time. I've been really trying not to this entire talk, because the fact of the matter is that I do have a lot of love and respect for Rutgers and everybody from there. Support, students and alumni. A lot of people will reach out to you after you graduate. I get a lot of reach outs on LinkedIn, and I try to give them time whenever I can. I think USACS runs an alumni mentorship program, where alumni just get matched up with students, and they give them sort of weekly doses of what this talk is. And please come back and give talks. Give talks so that I don't have to give bad talks like this one again. Convince your company to recruit at Rutgers if they don't already, because Rutgers is just criminally underrepresented everywhere. And it's not because of rankings or anything else. It's just that the other kids from the other universities hustled and got those companies to come there. So if your company is not recruiting, make sure that you make sure to go bother the recruiting staff at your company. If you don't know how to do that, or if you need advice, then please ask me, and I will tell you what I did. But this is the most important thing for me, just making sure that students here have access to opportunities. And yeah, make this place better than you left it. My closing thoughts, use your time wisely. Also use your brain because it is valuable and you have one, I promise. And I love you. That's it.